So we're at Suspension Werx in North Vancouver today, and I am now an ambassador for them. So I am getting full suspension set up today. Check out the shop, you guys. It's absolutely amazing in here. Suspension Werx is a legit professional suspension shop. These guys have all the tools and equipment to get the job done right. I'm so excited to be here today to have my suspension set up properly and learn a little more about fixing some of the problems I've been having with my setup. I hope you guys enjoy it too. All right, so I'm out at Suspension Werx today, and James is gonna tear apart my bike. Pretty stoked on this. Gonna have some lighter springs in there and get this bike dialed in for the woods.
This one's dirty.
Look at this awesome washing machine. So James has ripped the rear shock out of my bike, and he's gonna talk a little bit about why it's important to have a rear shock set up properly.
Well, currently this shock, the rebound is way too fast. So this is why you're experiencing the back end skipping out on you all the time. You're climbing up those steep chutes. So we're going to have a look and see what the rebound circuit is actually doing inside the shock.
Straight from OC James,
yeah.
the Irishman.
The Irishman. So the first thing we do before we take the shock apart is we get our measuring tape and we measure the shock, the spring inside the shock. So this one is at 243.
James took my shock over to a machine which compresses the spring, allowing him to get it off the shock without undoing the preload collars. This is so he can measure the preload on the spring correctly for accurate pre-work numbers.
So the spring, when it was in the shock, was measuring 243, and the true length of the spring is 250. So she's got 7 mil of preload on the spring.
Science, you guys.
So now we got to rate test this bad boy.
So now we're going to go over here and rate test the rear shock.
So for Crystal, for your weight, you should be on a 48 Newton meter spring. It says 48 Newton meter on the spring, but we always double check just in case, because sometimes the manufacturer can misprint the spring. So we've done the calculation, and it's come up here, it's 48.2 Newton meters.
That's how thorough they are here, you guys. Suspension Werx, North Vancouver.
Attention to detail.
Attention to detail.
So Crystal, because your bike has been lowered, we need to see exactly what the length of your shock actually is. So this fancy tool that we have here measures the eye to eye of the shock. So it's at 16 fully out. So we record all the settings for the customer, the before and after, so if you make any changes, the customer knows where the suspension was at before it came in and where it's at now.
You guys, James is on it, I'm telling you. The crazy Irishman. My bike has been lowered about an inch in the rear.
An inch in the rear. So if we want to lower a bike by, if we want to lower the forks by 1 inch, you lower the back by 12 mil to balance the bike out.
So my bike's been riding like a chopper, you guys.
Yeah, it's been riding like Harley Davidson.
So basically my front forks are sitting a little bit higher than the rear shock, which is why it's been a little bit uncomfortable for me on the bike. So this should make a huge difference for me. The full disassembly of the rear shock continued. These shocks have a lot of components, and that's why it's super important that your tuner is specialized, trained, and experienced. James has been in the suspension game for a long time, so he knows what's up.
Okay, so on this side here, this line of washers that you see, these are shims. So this is your rebound circuit here. This guy is your first shim that sits on the piston like so. This is your low speed compression or low speed rebound circuit. So these guys are the first shims to open when the shock is compressed on the return cycle, should I say. This is the piston itself. So the small ports this side, this is your rebound side. And then on this side, this is your compression side.
There's a lot going on in a rear shock, you guys. So this is all taken apart.
And then this is your compression circuit here.
So I know some of you ladies also have your bikes lowered. I don't know about the guys, but for us ladies, we're pretty short. I currently have my rear shock set at 15 millimeters. So we're actually gonna bring it back up to about 12. So I'll have a lot more clearance, and hopefully that helps me with not bottoming out on the logs. And so what are we doing over here, James?
We are going to machine down the spacer, the 3 mil, to get the proper eye to eye out of the shock.
So I was running 15 mil and we're gonna bring it to 12 mil, right?
Yeah.
So we're taking 3 mil off of this. So what are we doing here?
So James there has just put this in the lathe and he's just turned it down 3 mil. So this will bring, as I say, the shock was sitting at a length of 475. Now the shock's going to be sitting at a length of 478, which gives you an extra 3 mil of clearance in the back end.
Oh, you're supposed to smile for the camera.
Okay.
So they've circulated some oil through the shock and it is full of new fresh oil.
Yeah, so I'll just compress there.
High-tech stuff, you guys.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Oscar? Oh yeah, me too. After purging the shock of air with fresh oil, James charged up the reservoir with nitrogen to set the height of the internal floating piston. Once that was set correctly, the shock was just about ready to go back in the bike.
We've now gone from a shock that was 475 in length to 478 in length there. As you can see, it's bang on perfect.
So that's going to give me a little bit more clearance.
It's going to give you a lot more clearance on the underneath and the skid plate. The bike's going to want to sit a lot higher in its travel. It's also going to complement the front end. The front end, the bike will want to turn in nicer into corners and stuff, and you'll have a lot less deflection.
Awesome. Got that fancy rear shock in there. Suspension Werx. The next step here is taking off the front forks, and they're going to check those out, see if they need to be revalved, check the spring rates and everything else. And the front should always complement the rear, so they are going to go through everything. So we've taken the front shocks off, and these guys are using them as pogo sticks. So they're way too stiff, as you can clearly see. Probably set up for somebody 180 pounds or more, and I'm about $130. So we are now going to take the front forks apart, and these guys are going to see what's going on inside there.
We've got a lot of pinky whitey oil, which means that the oil is mixed with water. So for some reason there was water in the system. Your oil shouldn't be pink like that. It should be a nice reddish color.
All right, so we've got the front fork apart here, and this is kind of what is put into the cartridge there, and that's what...
This is it here. So this is just a little travel spacer that restricts the travel of the fork, and then obviously lowers the bike. So this one here is 1.5 inches long.
So that would explain some of the issues I'm having with the front end being
again,
stiff.
yeah, the front end is just not right.
So we're gonna fix that up, and I'll keep you guys up to date with all the new stuff going in it.
Now that we have the rear shock readjusted, it's another 3 mil longer. We need to do the front to balance the bike out. So we're taking out this 1.5 inch travel spacer, and we're putting in this alloy 1 inch travel spacer.
Now, what are the differences in materials there?
So this one's alloy, it's properly machined, and it slides on the shaft nice and freely.
Yep.
This one's just a piece of plastic. So over time this can compress and start to break down.
All right, so we're getting some upgrades here, people.
So we're getting some upgrades, yeah.
So the one good thing that I'm pretty stoked on is the fact that they've allowed me to be here and watch them work on the bike and teach me a bit about how suspension works. So, I mean, even just this, I mean, that's like a plastic spacer, and you know, we're upgrading to these aluminum ones. That's a big difference. So, you know, if I was a 200-pound guy, this might get crushed or splinter and cause some issues with the front forks. So it's nice to be able to be here and learn a little bit about what goes on and you know, what's in our bikes, because initially we're the ones riding the bikes at the end of the day.
So now we've got the fork taken apart. This is the mid valve area that we're working on. So on one side you got the mid valve, which controls kind of the ride height of the fork and also the oil flow up to the main compression circuit, which is on top here. And then on the other side of the piston, which is this guy here, we've got our rebound circuit. So as I say, we're starting to rebuild the mid valve, the compression side of it first, and then we'll start to do the rebound side.
Along with a full revalve, I'm also having all the seals and bushings replaced. James then added new Moto 2.5 weight oil to the forks to help these things perform to their best out on the trails and the track. So what was the old rate on my spring?
Your old spring rates were 4.2s.
And they're now
4.0s. You should have been on 4.0s to match the 48 rear spring. So now your bike is going to be evenly balanced spring-wise, and the ride height is going to be evenly balanced too.
So these are the springs after.
After a full rebuild, revalve, and proper springs, good tails and bushings, forks nice and smooth. Ready to take on like nothing.
The guys got the forks put back onto my bike. Everything that is done at Suspension Werx is calculated and deliberate. They fully understand what each modification will do and how to get the best individual setup for each rider. These guys are pros. Alright, so we're going to set my sag on the 250. Super important when you're dialing in suspension, so...
Now, sitting the pegs, taking the bike a good push. Push the front as well. Rock the bike there. Okay.
The process of setting sag can take a bit of time. You need to record your rider sag and static sag, then make adjustments to the preload collars on the rear spring. It usually takes a few attempts to dial it in correctly. It's much easier when you have professional suspension techs doing it for you. Jumping back on there. So that's it, guys. We got the sag set up correctly, and now my bike is ready to slay the trails. If you live in BC and you need your suspension done right, check out Suspension Werx located in North Vancouver.